Hey YouTube, this is Nordic Brit. Today I just wanted to talk about the fact that we are coming to some kind of correction, or we are going to come to some kind of crash. It's really inevitable. What I wanted to mention today was that there's a lot of things that are happening right now in the world. We've got the pandemic, there are political issues, there are various conflicts. Now, these are like the prime things. These are the things that normally get the news attention, the media focuses on these. But actually, when it comes to the economy, the stock market, your wealth, the finances of a country or the world in general, the health of an economy, if you want to put it that way, there are so many other factors to consider, not just whether a pandemic can break down an economy. If anything, what these kind of big events do is actually show the weaknesses of a system. Now, in the past couple of decades, we've had a lot of recessions and crises that have happened to the economy. Now, and if you look back in the past 10 to 20 years, what you will actually see is a series of recessions and crashes that are not really addressed. The fundamental issues that cause these crashes never not really addressed, and actually sometimes are made worse. So if you think about the banking crisis that happened in the last 10 years, for example, where the banks, and we were talking about the mortgage and securities issues there and the kind of derivatives and all those kinds of stuff, the ingredients that allowed that to happen are even more potent now than they were before. So the likelihood of an event happening again is actually increased rather than decreased. Any kind of government efforts during those kind of crises are really only reserved in terms of bailouts for the companies that caused them, rather than the underlying issues, which is to do with regulation. There are also many, many other factors to consider. Another thing to consider when looking at the health of an economy, it's really easy to look at the public debt and look at okay, this is how much the government owes. But however, there are so many other debts that exist and so many other issues that are underlying that are a problem that can trigger a larger thing. So when the big global crisis happens, or when we've had these crashes and recessions before, it's always really pointed out oh, look, the derivatives have crashed the system. But actually what they were done was strained by, say, all the mortgage issues and the kind of rampant loaning out of money to people who can't afford it and so on. These are underlying issues which eventually cascade. So the reason why I believe that a crash is coming or a large correction is coming, only one of those two. The reason that I believe that is because when you look at these issues that are not resolved, these are called macro effects. They're just building up. And what we're getting is a kind of pressure cooker of smaller things that are just being added to this pressure cooker over time. And when you get these larger things that happen, such as pandemics, they tend to reveal the weaknesses in the system. Now, right now, the stock market is going kind of crazy. The crypto market is going crazy. None of the kind of stock values and valuations of various cryptos and various companies do not make sense right now, because the world is so unstable, which doesn't make sense for things to go up and down so much. Instead, the stocks should be dropping because things are not normal. People are not shopping as much as they used to. People aren't taking loans as much as they used to. There's so much instability that the market shouldn't be as high as it is, but it is. Now, there's actually a few really good channels that I watch. Like many of you, you probably watch a lot of other prepper channels and stuff like that. A couple of channels that I watch tends to be Canadian Prepper, very down-to-earth guy, really awesome. City Prepping also. Very level-headed guys when it comes to how they look at the market. They try not to make too many predictions. They try to focus on what if this happens and what is that happening. But the last couple of videos that were put out by those two channels actually do really spell really clearly a kind of feeling that a lot of people who wouldn't normally mention this so upfront about, what, things are looking quite dodgy right now. We are going over this kind of hump of the stock market, which is a little bit concerning. when the stock market crashes or a correction happens, it's never just kind of directly off a cliff. It kind of bounces back every so often. I'm going to link a couple of videos in the description below to a video by Canadian Prepper and City Prepping, because they put a lot of effort into those videos and I think they're worth watching. But from my side of things, one thing that needs to be addressed when people look at like, okay, is the pandemic going to cause a crisis or a crash of the stock market or so on like that? But actually is to look at the build-up. How healthy was the economy before the pandemic? And it actually wasn't that healthy if you look at it, because all the issues that created the crashes that we've had before, the corrections we've had before, the recessions we've had before, were never addressed. So the issues still exist, and they've just been masked as something else, or they've changed into some other form. But I can't remember the exact numbers, but one of the issues that exists before is there's very few banks that control a huge proportion of the way the economy works in the United States, for example. And before the last recession crisis we had with the derivatives and the mortgage derivatives and so on, there was like 5 banks or something like that. And now there's like 3. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they've gotten less. They've actually consolidated into even larger banks and conglomerates, which is crazy, because that was part of the problem, and they've actually allowed it to get even worse. So when people thinking, okay, so maybe the government's going to come in and print some more money, that's a terrible solution. Obviously, it's basically an immediate fix, only short term, and then it becomes a bigger problem later. So the next crash will be even worse. So, when you look at this, do not rely on the federal government, do not rely on other governments to basically come in and just bail companies out and expect things to change even remotely, because the activity, the behavior of those who control the system never seems to change. And so when you consider these smaller macro things building up and these issues, that underlying issues that do not get resolved, you have to eventually know that the pressure cooker will burst, the bubble will burst. However, whatever metaphor you want to use, the more things you keep adding into this toxic system, eventually it has to break. And whether that comes through a large correction, which would be obviously detrimental to a lot of lives around the world, and that's the best case scenario, really. When this will happen is really hard to say, but time is really ticking on this. I try to give my advice as best as I feel, based on what I read and things like that. So based on my own research, and you look at the track record of the markets, you look at how things are performing, and you just look at the real world and realize, wow, there's a lot of disconnect between Wall Street and the numbers, the GDP of countries and so on. And you look at like, how are things getting better in the stock market when everything else around is kind of on fire? And so I'm expecting a crash or a correction this year. That's really my prediction. I don't want to put out like a solid prediction because these things are so uncertain. But basically, if you consider that we have so many issues right now that are unresolved, this is concerning time. 2021, if it happens in this year, people need to really be prepared for that, because if the government just prints money to fix the problem, that's going to be another problem to deal with later. And the time frame in between recessions and crashes are getting even shorter each time, and every time it happens, it does punish people a lot. And now we have this pandemic, and most people's savings and the security of jobs has already been put into jeopardy. So just as a warning to you guys out there, to everyone watching, just take into account the fact that it's not just the large things that the media focus on, but the past 10 to 20 years of macroeconomic mismanagement and events that have gone unresolved also are waiting to burn us later. And those will accumulate with the larger events, and normally it's the larger events that trigger all the smaller things to go off as well. It's kind of a domino effect. So that's my thought on that. I'm planning another video about preparation and stuff like that soon. I'll try to get it out as soon as I can. But I hope everyone is good. I hope everyone stays safe. And as always, Nordic Brit out, and I'll see you in the next video.